From Bay Rabbi Yosef. The schus of our learning should be a protection. Shav Mashiach.
Amen.
Let's begin. Tzadik Hey Amud Beis. That's 95b on the bottom line. Correct, Daniel? That's where we ended. Okay. So the Gemara says, Bay Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef asks the question. This is the second question. We're discussing what happens if the Pesach is brought b'tumah, because there's the majority of the congregation is tamei, so you're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach b'tumah. So his first question was, what happens if someone tamei, he's allowed to go into the Azara, what happens if he ends up in the Heichal? The second question, which we start now, is Dachku Tmei Mesim V'achlu Eimuri HaPesach Haba B'tumah. What happens if someone that was tamei meis, so he's allowed to, and more than allowed to, he's supposed to be bringing the Korban Pesach even though there's tumah there. However, he oversteps his limitations, and he oversteps the boundaries, and he, instead of just eating what he's supposed to be eating, he actually eats the parts of the animal that are supposed to be brought on the altar. Now, the rule is like this, that's a violation. He's not allowed to eat that. The question is he considered that he ate it b'tumah? Does he have the prohibition of eating something that's tamei, of a person eating kachim while he's tamei? Now, he's eating kachim while he's tamei, but that's only the parts of the animal that he was supposed to be eating. Now he's eating other parts of the animal while he's tamei that he wasn't supposed to be eating. Is that an iser tumah in a case where the tumah is pushed aside because the whole community is tamei? That's Rashi's pshat. Rabbeinu Chananel has another pshat. What comes out from Rabbeinu Chananel's pshat is that there's a premise here that when a korban is brought b'tumah, which is allowed in that case, but he doesn't actually offer those parts on the altar. It's only eaten. The blood is sprinkled, but those parts are not brought on the altar. Comes along Rabbeinu Chananel now and explains Rabbi Yosef that he comes and he touches those parts, that he makes them tamei. Doesn't say eating. I don't know if you see it in the bottom line of my Rabbeinu Chananel. By Rabbi Yosef, sounds like that they weren't supposed to be touched at all. They're just supposed to be left. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Rashi's pshat means that he goes and he eats it, and now there's a prohibition of eating it, but the question is there another prohibition of eating it b'tumah, which that's a serious prohibition of someone that's tamei that eats kachim. Okay, so we're on top of Tzadik Vav Mahu. What's the din? Midah straight to basar, ishtri nami to masimurim. Do we say ishtri means permissible? The word mutar, the taf switches with the shin, and we get shari. It's the same word. Midah ishtri, the taf gets thrown in there. Midah ishtri to basar, ishtri nami to masimurim. From the fact that it was permissible to have the actual basar, the flesh, even though he's tamei. So the Tumasimurim is also ishtri, is also permissible. My dishtri, my ishtri. No. What did we allow? Only the eating of the flesh. We never allowed, there was never a permissibility, an exemption for the parts that go on the altar. And so therefore, he's violating not only eating parts of the animal that he's not that go on the altar that he's not allowed to eat, but he's also violating the laws of eating them b'tumah. Amar Rava. Rava says, Michti, let's take a look at this. It says like this. Where is the laws of not eating the emurim are the limbs that go on the altar? Mitumas basar. When a person's tamei. We learn it from Tumas Basar, the Ksiv Asher Lashem. The pasuk is talking about that he is going to eat the flesh of an animal while he's tamei, the flesh of an animal that is for God. Now those words that is for God, and it's referring to when he's tamei, that teaches me l'Rabbi Saseimorim is coming to teach me also that there's a prohibition of tumah on the limbs that go on the altar as well, if he eats those. So Rava continues like this. He says, "Kol hechad isil tumas basar isil tumas imurim." Where's the source of tumas imurim? It's from tumas basar. So if there's tumas basar, then they have tumas imurim. Basar is the part that he eats. Imurim is the part that goes on the altar. Only if he's prohibited from the tumas basar would there be tumas imurim. Kol hechad lesil tumas basar lesil tumas imurim. A very lenient opinion here. There's no prohibition for him to have those limbs bitumah. There's another prohibition that he's not allowed to have them. But the tumah aspect doesn't apply because there's no tumas basar problem, so therefore there's no tumas imurim problem. By Reb Zera. Okay. Reb Zera has a question. Imuri Pesach Mitzrayim hechach terinu. I'm not sure how this question comes in. This question is the imurim on the first Pesach. This is a question like a curious question that students would ask when they hear about. You start learning the halachas, they would ask this question right away. They would say, in Mitzrayim, what altar did they use to put the imurim on? I know that they had to eat the flesh. I know what they did with the blood, put it on the doorpost. But where did they offer the parts that need to go on the mizbeach? It's Reb Zera's question. It's a very good question. So Amalei Abaya says, Man leimalan delay shaviski avud. How do you know they just didn't make it into a roast? Where do you know that shaviski means to put it on a spit and to roast it? Maybe they just roasted it. There was no halach over there. They're asking like which mizbeach did they use? There was no halachas of mizbeach. It was before the giving of the Torah. We don't have any of those laws. They were just told what to do, and they did exactly what to do. The rest of it, you're using future laws to ask questions on what happened earlier. Doesn't work like
weren't
that.
They all tamei?
Oh, in Mitzrayim?
Yeah.
Were they all tamei? If they were Jewish, they were tamei. They were first becoming Jewish. I don't know if the laws of tumah applied. They were, a non-Jew doesn't really become tamei, rabbinically tamei. But biblically, there's no tumah. There's no tumah on anything that's alive except for a Jew.
So I'm saying they ate the imurim while they were tamei.
Yeah, but the laws of tumah would only apply if they were Jewish, but they were still in Mitzrayim. They didn't receive the Torah yet. You follow? Oh, but Chaim, I see what your point is. The reason why this Gemara is coming in here is because it's telling us that they ate the imurim. Yeah, that's the connection. That they ate the imurim, according to Abaya's answer, they ate the imurim when they were tamei. Even though it wouldn't have the halachas of tumah. V'oid, another point Abaya is bringing out. Hataner Reb Yosef, Gimel Mizbechos Hayisham. They had 3 mizbeachs there. Alamashke Falshtei Mezuzis. What Reb Yosef, the brisa that he's quoting, is telling us that the location of where the blood was put was on 3 places, on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel. So that's like 3 mizbeachs. And anything else wasn't there. So the fact that there's a brisa that says there were 3 mizbeachs, and that's the 3 places where the blood would be placed, the 2 doorposts in the top, that means that there was no other mizbeach to offer the imurim. So that's Abaya's answer to Reb Zera's question that there was no imurim. There was no offering of the imurim on the mizbeach. Okay. Yeah. The basis of this is the basis of Reb Zera's question was that we'd have a future problem. How do you deal with that in the past? It's like this fella said, when I was young, we didn't have electricity. I had to watch television in the dark. So that's the style of this. Okay. Ma ben Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Teres. The Mishnah begins. What's the difference between the first Pesach and then the future Pesach? This really flows nicely, the Gemara into the Mishnah, but it wasn't written like that. But okay, the first Pesach was when they were coming out of Egypt, and Pesach Teres is all the Pesachs later of all the generations. Pesach Mitzrayim Echlei Be'Basar. There's a special law by Pesach Mitzrayim that they had to purchase. Doesn't actually mean purchase. It means to designate. They would have to say Zel L'Shem Pesach. They would have to designate the animal on the 10th of the month, L'Shem Pesach. Beton Hazar Bagudas Ezer. And it would also need to be sprinkled with the Agudas Ezer. The Agudas Ezer, the bundle of hyssop. They would have to use that in the blood to sprinkle it on the doorpost. But yeah, it's supposed to be the al. It's supposed to be Bagudas Ezer ala mashke. You erase that verb. I have an extra verb. Ala mashke b'al mezuzos on the lintel and on the two doorposts. Okay, so two halachas that are different between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Teres. B'nechal b'chipazim, it's eaten in haste. That's another halacha. And b'layla echad, one night. The Gemara is going to challenge this part of the Mishnah because there's a problem here. Because you have one night to eat for every Pesach. You only have one night. What does it mean over here, b'layla echad? Okay. Pesach Teres night kol sheva. However, Pesach for all generations applies all 7 days. Now, the Gemara is going to ask on this, that what do you mean? You only bring a carbon Pesach on the first day. So maybe we're talking about something else. Maybe we're talking about the holiday. But what does the holiday consist of? So we're going to say that it's referring to chametz. That Pesach Mitzrayim, there was only a prohibition of chametz for 1 day. But Pesach Teres, there's a prohibition of chametz for 7 days. And the Mishnah would be missing words. We have to add in one more phrase into the Mishnah. That's regarding chametz, Pesach, Mitzrayim is only 1 day, and Pesach Teres is 7 days. Okay, the Gemara will see in the Gemara. Minalan. The Gemara asks, where do we know that there's a difference? Where do we know there's a difference between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Teres? It says in the pasuk, "Dabel kaladas Yisrael leimar besel achedesh hazeh v'yikchu." Speak to the Jewish people, to the whole congregation of the Jewish people, saying on the 10th of this month, and they should take. They should take means that they should designate. So the Gemara explains, it says b'chodesh hazeh, this month. And it's coming to tell us something specific about right now, which means that only on this Pesach do you have to take it on the 10th and designate it. But the other Pesachs later on, you don't have to do that. Alamayata, this is creating a problem because every time it's going to say hazeh regarding in that chapter of the first Pesach, the command of the first Pesach, we're going to try to think that maybe that what it just said is only at the first Pesach, but not at the other Pesach. Elamayat, if that's the case, it sounds like it says that you're supposed to guard this animal for 4 days. They would tie it to the post and they would watch it. What that means is that they would check if it had a blemish for 4 days. Now it says over there, it says hazeh. For this month, you watch it for the 4 days until the 14th. That means that only that first Pesach, the animal needs to be checked for a mum for 4 days, but you don't have to check the other Pesach, all future generations. Now, okay, fine, but the problem is, but we have a brayso when it comes to a carbon tamid, I have to check it 4 days before the shchita. We're not discussing the designation of it. In other words, I could have a whole group of animals that I'm checking all of them, and I didn't designate them yet. I'm just watching them to see if there's a mum. How do you know that a carbon tamid has to be checked 4 days before the shchita? To guard it, to bring it in its time, And also says further on, and it should be a guard. It should be guarded until the 14th. We see that the carbon tama needs to be watched for 4 days, and the carbon Pesach, the first Pesach, needs to be watched for 4 days. So that means that karbanos need to be watched for 4 days. So what are you telling me? That I don't have, that everything that it says by the first Pesach doesn't apply to the later ones. If it says the word hazeh, we see clearly that we do learn from that to other things. Gemara says Shani Hasan D'Ksiv Tishma. There's a Gzeir Shava here. If you look carefully at the pasuk, it says Vayolachem leMishmeres. It should be for you guarding until the 14th. And it says L'chedesh Hazeh. Now, I have a problem with the word Hazeh because that's telling me excluding the Pesach Doiros. But I do have the word Tishmeru. And then when I look at the pasuk of Tishmeru L'hakriv Libim Mayadei by the carbon tamid, that tells me that I do learn from that to the carbon tamid, that it needs to be guarded for 4 days. Now, the Gemara is assuming, and concluding as well, that if the carbon tamid needs to be 4 days, also the Pesach needs to be 4 days guarded. But you see that from the word Tishmeru, I have a Gzeir Shava that tells me the halachas of Pesach Doiros also applies to the Pesach. Pesach Mitzrayim applies to Pesach Doiros. However, I still have the pasuk of Hazeh. Okay. Pesach Doiros Nami Haksiv Avadata Aveda Azeis B'Chedesh Hazeh Shiu Kol Avedas Achedesh Avedas Chedesh Zeh Kazeh. Now we see that the Pesach Doiros has the same halacha, that I needs to be guarded. It needs to be watched for 4 days. Where do I see that? It says V'Avadata Aveda Azeis B'Chedesh Hazeh. This is a chapter later. That in Shemais in Boy, that I have to do the service of this month. I have to do this service in this month, and that tells me that everything is done the same way it's done the first time. Exactly the opposite of what we're learning. So, which means that I have to guard it for 4 days. Okay. The problem is, so why did it say Hazeh? If you then afterwards come and tell me that you do everything the same, then Hazeh tells me that you do it different. Pesach Sheni doesn't need 4 days of guarding. That's the exception. When it said, that pasuk by Pesach Mitzrayim that says I have to guard it till the 14th, that's only the 14th of Nisan. But I don't have to guard it to the 14th of Iyar. I can take it on the 13th of Iyar, and it's good enough. Elamayata, that's the case. It says that you should eat the sacrifice, the flesh of the sacrifice on this night. Maybe that means that only the Pesach Mitzrayim is eaten at night. The other carbon Pesachs of later generations are eaten during the day. Interesting question. It says Hazeh. Go back to that pasuk that says no, everything is the same. Okay, now you're gonna have to go back and say, so what's the Hazeh? Allah Hazel Amali. So then why does it say Hazeh if you want to tell me that everything is the same? So look at the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Famous Gemara and Brachas, and other places at the end of the Masechta over here as well, that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva about when you have to finish the carbon Pesach, when you have to finish eating the carbon Pesach, which means the Seder. Do you have the whole night, or do you have only until Chatzos? Okay, so that's what the Hazeh would be telling me. That it's not the full night, possibly. Okay, now we're switching from Hazeh to the word Bay. But we have the same point. Hazeh is a specific term, which means this, which is limiting only this and nothing else. So also it says that anyone that's not circumcised should not eat from it. It is also exclusive, that only it they can't eat from, but other things they can eat from. So it sounds like that only someone that's uncircumcised should not eat from the first Pesach. But later generations, let's say there's a fellow that his brothers passed away because of hemophilia. The blood didn't clot, and therefore they didn't give him a circumcision, which is halachically correct. He's not supposed to have a circumcision if that's the case. So, although he's a regular Jew, but he's not circumcised, but there's one halacha, he's not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach. So, we're asking that was the halacha that was stated by the first Korban Pesach. Sounds like other Korban Pesachs he's allowed to, because it says from that Korban Pesach he shouldn't eat from future Korban Pesach. So he should be allowed. The Gemara says 1 second. We have that pasuk. Now we're starting. We're just referencing it now with the one word. That pasuk that says that taught me that everything that's done on that first Pesach is done by the other Korban Pesach. So Pesach Doros. So we see that the halacha is the same. So the Gemara goes back and says, so why does it say boy? Ela boy lamali. The Gemara says boy eino oichal aval hu oichal b'matzah marer. He doesn't need the Korban Pesach, but he still has the matzah marer. Very interesting. So he goes to the Seder and he eats his matzah in a bag. Shouldn't touch the Korban Pesach. That would be. It shouldn't touch the wine. Shouldn't get. He shouldn't touch the Korban Pesach because he's not allowed to have the Korban Pesach, and he has Marah. It's only the Korban Pesach that he doesn't have. Elamiyata, it says v'chol ben nechar lo yochel bay. Ben nechar is any son of a stranger. The Gemara learns it doesn't mean a non-Jew. The Gemara says it means an apostate, a mumar, someone that acts strange in front of God, that he is a stranger to God. He left the religion. I don't know what's included in that exactly, but the mumar is not supposed to eat from the Korban Pesach. So sounds like he could eat from Pesach Doros, from later Korban Pesach. Pasuk says no. That's the reference to the source that all the halachas are the same. If that's the case, so why does it say bay? If you tell me afterwards that I have another source that everything is the same. So bay, we throw in another category here to fix this up. Because if the halacha is going to be the same Pesach Mitzrayim to Pesach Doros, that a mumar is not allowed to eat by both of them, so why does it say bay? So bay is not coming to tell me about a future Pesach. Bay is coming to tell me that he's allowed to eat truma. Let's say he's a kohen, an apostate kohen. So he's not allowed to eat.
Could there be such a thing?
No, this is all theoretical. So he's not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach, but he's allowed to eat truma. Truma is the gift that the Yisraelim give to the kohen. It's 1/50th, 2% of the produce. It needs to say both of these. The aral doesn't eat from the Korban Pesach, and it also needs to say the ben nechar doesn't eat, the apostate doesn't eat from the Korban Pesach. Because of Rachmana aral, if it would only say an aral doesn't eat from the Korban Pesach, mishum demas, we'd say that's disgusting. God considers the arla disgusting. Aval ben nechar loimas, but an apostate is not disgusting. Yes, strange ideas, but it's not disgusting. Emalai, I could say that he could eat from the Korban Pesach. So tzricha, it's necessary to tell me that he doesn't eat from the Korban Pesach. If it would say just the apostate, I would say, well, his heart isn't focused towards heaven. But the one that's not circumcised, he's a Orthodox Jew. He has the right faith. Why doesn't he have a bris? He doesn't have a bris because he has hemophilia. So I would say that he could eat from the Korban Pesach. It's not his fault. So tzricha. It's necessary to have both of them. Okay, now the following two lines, Rashi skips. Rashi says it shouldn't be in the. Well, I'll read it. But What about the hired helper, the bought help? Okay. Like we said before, that Hamaras Das, an apostate, only doesn't eat from the Karban Pesach, but eats from Truma. The problem Rashi has with this is that the terms Teisha v'Sachar are actually talking about Jews that they do eat from the Karban Pesach. Elameyata, if that's the case, Umalta Oz Yochal Bay, when he's given a circumcision, then that group, that household, is allowed to eat from the Karban Pesach. Sounds like that only then they're not allowed to eat before the circumcision. But Pesach Deiros, they don't need to give them the circumcision. The pasuk says no. All the laws are the same. Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Deiros. So why does it say boy? So it says boy milas zachar v'avadas ma'keves v'milas zachar v'avadas ma'keves b'truma. If there's a Kayan household, everyone needs to be circumcised in order to eat the Karban Pesach. Or that doesn't have to do with the Kayan. Any household, everyone needs to be circumcised in the household for that household to eat from the Karban Pesach. However, if it's a Kayan household and they're getting Truma, even if there's someone that's not circumcised in the household, they're still allowed to eat from the Truma. It's only by the Karban Pesach that we have this limitation of circumcised, not by Truma, like we said before. Elameyata, we ask again another question. You shouldn't break a bone in the Karban Pesach. Which Pesach was that talking about? Talking about the first Pesach. It's actually a quote from Pesach Sheni. Maybe it's only that Pesach, but not the future generations. Unless it's a mistake in the quote over there. My Gemara says it's quoting from Bamidbar Test, which is Pesach Sheni. Amakra Bavarata. It says no, all the halachas are the same. Ela boy lamali, so why does it say boy? It says boy b'kashav v'lei b'pasel. You're allowed to break a bone in a pasel carbon. We had this discussion before. What do you do if it's nicer? How do you get rid of the marrow that was inside? Okay, Dr. Stein, what is that picture?
It's just an ancient Seder with the Korban Pesach. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry for my client. I'm sorry for my client distracting.
No, I thought he was trying to bring in like apostates or something like radical.
No, I had to look twice because initially I thought it was the apostate.
Okay. What about the halacha that it needs to be cooked? It can't be raw. It sounds like from it can't be raw. That means only from the first Pesach. What about later Karban Pesach? It could be raw. It says no. We use the other pasuk that includes everything together. That it's the similarities. That it's the comparison. So if that's the case, so why does it say mimenu from it? You're not allowed to eat it raw. Look at the Rabba Amar Rab Yitzchak. What Rabba said Amar Rab Yitzchak, that said that an oral is not allowed to eat from the Karban Pesach. And an oral, an uncircumcised person is also not allowed to eat meiser. Meiser that goes to Yerushalayim. This is the first time that we have this mentioned here. That although we said that an oral can eat truma, but he can't eat meiser. Meiser is brought to Yerushalayim. It's the second tithe, and that he can't eat if he's uncircumcised. It's a gezerah shava. It says mimenu by Pesach. It says the word mimenu by meiser. We learn it together that just like by the Karban Pesach, he needs to be circumcised, so too by meiser, he needs to be circumcised. Okay, the next point of the Mishnah was that it was eaten in haste. Nechal b'chipazon. Minalan. Where do you see this? The haste, I don't know exactly what the haste means, how quickly that means, but it says that was only applied to Pesach Mitzrayim, not Pesach Thursday. Maybe it means with their belts on. I'm not sure. Masnechem Chagurim. Nalechem Baraglechem, right? They have to have the belts on and the shoes on. We didn't find that halacha anywhere else that they needed to do that. That must be what it means. Places has an interesting question. So maybe it's coming to tell me that Pesach Sheni is not eaten b'chipazon, but Pesach Deiros is eaten b'chipazon because I have the pasuk of Avarata that everything is the same. Like we didn't go through that discussion as we did. We switched a little bit from the way we were doing this in the previous Gemara. That every time we said something, we then compared it back to the Korban Pesach. We put it all into the same group because of the pasuk of Avarata. For some reason, we didn't do that. Okay, Pesach Deiros Noig Kol Shiva. Okay, now we get into this problematic piece of the Mishnah where it says that the Pesach for future generations is all 7 days, which sounds like the Korban Pesach is all 7 days. The Gemara right away asks, Amai Kai, what is this referring to? Ilema Pesach, if it's referring to the Korban Pesach, Pesach Kol Sheva Miyaka, do you bring another sacrifice each one of the 7 days? Ela Chametz, it must be referring to Chametz. Michlal, the Pesach Mitzrayim, Laila Echad V'Sulai. Now, if you read that phrase together, it says, B'Laila Echad, Pesach Mitzrayim, Pesach Deiros Noig Kol Sheva. Pesach Mitzrayim was only one night. Pesach Deiros is for 7 days. That means that when were they not allowed to have chametz? In the first Pesach was only the first night. By the day, they were allowed to have chametz. But Tanya, there's a problem. We have a brayser, basically. How do you know that the Pesach Mitzrayim, they had the prohibition of chametz just 1 day? He's limiting it from 7 days. But the fact is, he's still saying 1 day as opposed to 1 night. Talmud Laimar, Layechal chametz. It says in the pasuk, don't eat chametz. And it says, today you are going out, which means that it's a full day. So back to the Mishnah, why does the Mishnah say that the Pesach Mitzrayim was 1 night and Pesach Deiros is 7 days? It's not 1 night, it's a whole day, the prohibition of chametz by the first Pesach. Eliyachi Kamar coming to tell us, Laila Echad, 1 night. It's the Korban Pesach is eaten 1 night. By the Pesach Mitzrayim, it was b'chipazon. V'hu adin lePesach Deiros, and also for the future generations, it's also 1 night. The 1 night part regarding the Korban Pesach is the same for Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Deiros. The difference would only be the chipazon aspect, the haste. V'chimutza kol hayayin. We'll throw in one more category for this Mishnah to fit. It's sort of like a chasuri mechzer v'hachik tani. The Mishnah is missing words. It has to be read like this. And the chametz, the prohibition of chametz is all day. Pesach Deiros Noig Kol Sheva. However, future generations, the Korban Pesach, that's for 7 days. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, we have a new Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, Shamati, I heard, Shetmuras Pesach Kreva, Utmuras Pesach Ena Kreva. I heard 2 statements. One is that a exchanged Korban Pesach, which that's a prohibition. You're not allowed to exchange a Korban. Because the Torah says, don't exchange one for another. And if you do, it's called Tmura. We have the whole Masechta on that. What happens is, when you do exchange it, it becomes a Korban as well. Now they're both Korbanos. So I heard that a Tmuras Pesach is brought, and I also heard a Tmuras Pesach is not brought. But I don't have the explanation. Yeah, we mentioned once that Rabbi Yeshua is the one that's saying this, because Rabbi Yeshua, it says, Ashrei Yeladatai, praised as his mother. He's one of the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And his mother is praised. Why? Because she brought him to the Beis Medrash in the cradle to listen to the sages studying. So when he was in the cradle, he was hearing. what they said. But if he had any questions, he wasn't able to ask. He would just cry. They didn't know what he wanted. They probably gave him a pacifier. So, so he says, Shamati, Veni Yedei Lefarish. Mainly Lefarish. He doesn't know the pshat. He wasn't able to ask. Okay. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ani Afarish. Rabbi Akiva says, I have the explanation. Rabbi Akiva is younger, probably. But he says, I have the explanation. I figured it out. Either he figured it out or he has a different tradition from someone else. HaPesach shenimtza koidem shchitas HaPesach yirad shitzdoi v'yimacher v'yam dav shlamim v'chein k'murasi. It says like this. He throws in one more example. Another example besides for Tamura. What happens is, let's say a Korban Pesach gets lost. Now you're in trouble. What are you going to do? You have to. It's almost Erev Pesach, and you lost the Korban Pesach. So you designate another korban, and you go and you bring that korban. Okay. What happens when you find the old one? So it depends. If you found it before the shechita of the new one, now I have two korbanos. Now, when you go and take one of them, it's as if you're doicha biyadayim. You're pushing, you're rejecting the first one that you designated, and you're bringing the new one. Because it was rejected, it can't be brought as a sacrifice. So you let it get a mum, and you sell it as a regular animal, and with the money you bring a shlamim. Now, the same thing would be with that rejected sacrifice. If you then went and exchanged it for another sacrifice, Tamura, if you did Tamura on that, the same halacha would apply. The Tamura would have the same halacha as the first one, that you can't bring it as a sacrifice. You have to wait till it gets a mum, sell it, and then bring with that money a new sacrifice. Because since it was rejected, it doesn't get accepted back. Why was it rejected? Because you had both of them in front of you, and you took one and you offered that. The other one was standing there, and it got rejected. Let's say you've only found it after the first korban was offered. Your second korban, yeah, the second one that was made. You didn't find the first one until after the korban pesach was offered. So then karev shlamim, that was lost. That wasn't rejected. You didn't have it. It wasn't there in front of you. So therefore, that one could be offered. Itself could be offered. Rabbi Akiva is explaining what Rabbi Yeshua didn't know. Yeshua didn't know which Tamura was able to be offered it directly. That's a Tamura of the one that was found after the shechita of the first one. Which Tamura was not able to be offered and needed to get a mum, and then with the money, that was if it was found before the shechita and it was rejected. It was dacha biyadayim. Okay, v'chein Tamura, and the same applies to the Tamura of this. The Gemara right away asks that Rabbi Yeshua gave us a complicated case when he could have told us the most basic case. B'leima pesach karav v'pesach eina karav. He started to tell us about the Tamura, the exchanged one, but he didn't tell us about the Korban Pesach itself. We really have two cases. One, a Korban Pesach is itself offered as a shlamim, and another Korban Pesach, which is not offered as a shlamim, it has to wait to get a mum. Which one was that? Rabbi Akiva explained. That's the one that was found before the shechita. Gemara answers, like krava. No, well, what Rabbi Yeshua is doing by telling me the bigger chiddush is if he would have told me the smaller chiddush, I wouldn't have known the bigger chiddush. He tells me the bigger chiddush, it includes the smaller one. Itmar, it was stated by Amoraim, and there's a machlekes. Rabba says that the discussion here is where does the line, where do you draw the line between if the Korban Pesach is allowed to be offered as a shlamim, the one that was found later, and it's Tamura, or if it needs to get a mum and then with the money you buy a shlamim, where do you draw that line? If it was found before the shechita or if it was found after the shechita? Not the actual shechita. He says the difference is chatzos, which means that according to Reb Zera, if I find it after chatzos, even if it's before the shechita, which Rabba would accept as a problematic korban now, Reb Zera would still say that no, it's after chatzos. It's after chatzos, and it's still acceptable to be brought as a korban. It's not considered the chol biyadayim. Reb Zera ktani koydem shechita se Pesach, but according to Reb Zera, it says koydem shechita that you found it. There should still be, according to Reb Zera, you found it after chatzos. It's not the time yet. Ema kaidem zman shchitas haPesach. Not kaidem shchitas haPesach, kaidem zman shchitas haPesach. The time of the shchita, which is chatzais. There's really a half hour there. But midaraisa, it's chatzais. The Gemara says kitanoi haPesach nimtza kaidem shchita. There's actually machlekes tanoim. The Brisa says a Pesach that's found before the shchita, yira, you let it get a month. That means that you had to designate a new one. You found the old one. Now it's dachol b'yadayim. So you let it get a month. La'achar shchita yikra. But after the shchita, you can bring it as a shlamim. It itself. You don't have to sell it. Rabbi Eliezer Eimer kaidem chatzeis yira, la'achar chatzeis yikra. Rabbi Eliezer says no. After chatzeis, you already can bring it. Doesn't have to be after the shchita that you found it. And once it's after chatzais, then it's not considered the chul b'yadayim. Okay. After the shchita, then you bring a carbon shlamim. If you find it after the shchita, then you bring it as a shlamim. You don't have to sell it and let it get a mum. They let it get a mum and sell it and buy a new one. No, you can bring this one itself as a shlamim. Amar, it says Rava, but it has to be Rava. Amar Rava, we'll see in a moment. Abai is going to ask a question. Yeah, it appears to be Rava. In the Bach changes it. A slight complication. We so far we left everything simple. The simple was the simple case was that you lost the carbon Pesach. Then you found it either before the shchita or after the shchita, and that's the difference. Does it get a mum or can you bring it itself? We threw in another category as well. You found it before the shchita, and you did tamur on it. You exchanged it for another carbon. Now I have two karbanas that need to get a mum to be sold. I found it before the shchita because they were both the chul b'yadayim, or it came from a carbon that was the chul b'yadayim. If I found it after the shchita and I did tamura, then I can bring them both as a shlamim directly without selling them. Comes along Rabbah and throws in here a slight complication. This was, when is it considered acceptable if you found it after the shchita and you did tamura after the shchita? But let's say, aval nimtza kaidem shchita. You found it before the shchita. Behemer bayacher shchita. But the tamura was done after the shchita. That means that the first carbon was rejected because I had them both in front of me. But then when I did tamura, it was after the shchita. I have to view it that it came from a kedusha dechuya, and therefore the new carbon that was exchanged with it, the tamura, is also dechuya, and I can't bring either of them. Esvei Abaya. Abaya has a question. Pasuk says, Im kesev u'makriv. If he brings from it a lamb, the pasuk is referring to a carbon shlamim. Now it's talking about iminatzayin karbanai. If he's from sheep, now sheep means that it's a lamb, and then the carbon shlamim is divided into two categories: tzayin and a's and goats. The pasuk continues when it's talking about the tzayin. It says im kesev, sheep. That's extra because we already know it's a lamb if it's from sheep. Flock, tzayin means flock, but that's referring to sheep. Matam alaymer im kesev. Why is this coming to teach this extra phrase? L'rabbeis tmuras haPesach haPesach shakrei b'shlamim. It's coming to tell me that if I exchange a carbon Pesach after Pesach, it's considered, after the carbon Pesach is offered, it's considered a shlamim. The Gemara says, Hechidami. Zabai is pointing out his question on Rabbah. If you're talking about that you found the carbon Pesach after the shchita, you found the first one that was lost, and then you exchange it with another one. So both of those are shlamim. That's obvious. Lama likra, I need a special pasuk to tell me it's a regular tamura shlamim. I don't need an extra words in the pasuk of shlamim to teach me that that's a shlamim. Ela lav shnim tzakaydem shchita. Must be that you found it before shchita. Behemer bayacher shchita. See, if it was found before shchita and the tamura was before shchita, so then I know that it needs to be brought, it needs to be get a mum, sold, and and purchased a new carbon with that money. It must be that it was the case over here is that it was found before the shechita, the lost carbon. But I did tmura on it after the shechita. And what do I find? That it's brought as a shlamim in kesef. You bring it as a shlamim. It's a kashan Rabbah. Rabbah would have told me that it comes from kedusha dechuya. The pasuk, the brisa tells me that you bring it anyway. You bring it as a shlamim. Gemara says, "Lie, it's not the case. Really, you found it after shechita. V'hemer by after shechita, and you did tmura after shechita. And so why? What are you telling me? I don't need a pasuk for that. You're right. Kras machta balma. The pasuk isn't teaching me that. That's just the way to remember. It's just an asmachta. It's a support. But lemaisa, it's an extra word. Elakrola mayasa. But what is the words telling me? As I granted, the brisa is not telling me that that's the real limud from the pasuk. But I need another limud. That's Kiddatanya. The pasuk is telling me something else. Kesev l'Rabbi says a Pesach la'aliyah. It's coming to teach me that, you see, by all the karbanos, by the chatas and the yasham and the shlamim, it always says, if it's a sheep, it always says that when what do I put on the mizbeach? The chaylev I put on the mizbeach. That's chaylev aliyah I put on the mizbeach. It always says the chaylev of the fat tail I put on the mizbeach. By the Korban Pesach, it doesn't mention the aliyah. It only mentions the chaylev that I put on the mizbeach. It doesn't say the aliyah. So it's coming to tell me kesev l'Rabbi says a Pesach la'aliyah, that the aliyah needs to be put on the mizbeach. K'shuaymer im kesef, when the pasuk says im kesef l'Rabbi Pesach shavush shenosai v'shlamim abayim machmas Pesach l'chol mitzvah shlamim sheton tzmicha nesachim t'nufas chosef v'sheik. The word kesef tells me that the Korban Pesach needs to have the aliyah. The word im kesef tells me that anything that comes because of a Korban Pesach has all the laws of a shlamim, if it's not brought actually as a Pesach, and it needs smicha and tenufa and chosef v'sheik is given, the chest and the thigh is given to the kohen. Kshuaymer v'im eiz hifzik inyan, when it says a goat, it's coming to stop those first laws. The tail of the eiz does not need to be put on the altar. Okay, let's leave the ikad mastila for tomorrow. We'll stop right here.